Well, it's been about 15 minutes and it seems dry. If I tilt it a little, yeah, there's no white or really light parts of it, at least not that I can see. And I guess the biggest bubble of it doesn't feel tacky, doesn't pop. Well, we don't want that to happen. I think it's ready for us to prepare our wash. So let's move over to the palette. Okay, this brown that we want to make is going to be made out of, well, it's going to be a warm brown, so I want to make it out of a warm red and a warm yellow. And to turn it brown, we'll add some phthalo blue. Get a little more red off of here. I think I can erase this. Well, that's a good blob of paint. I have to be careful. What it is, I happen to dissolve a bit of that red, and I want to make sure that there's no chunks of it. That's probably enough, maybe even more than enough. Well, we're going to spread it out here because we have some different jobs we want this to do. And I like mixing my paint between the two locations. So I'll actually reach up here, and not that you have to do it the way I do it, but and there's a little red in my brush, but that's okay. So I've got my yellow coming down here to kind of brighten it up a little. So we'll mix it in, pull some down, and see what we have. Well, that's kind of a nice orangey color. You know what happens if you mix orange and blue? They're opposites, complementary colors. Well, let's find out again. So I'll rinse my brush, mostly because I don't want a lot of red in my phthalo blue. So prepare some of that. It doesn't take a lot. We have a couple of things that we're going to use it for, so we'll leave that there, and I'll just go over here and add some in and see what it does. Well, that's turning kind of grayish. Yeah, probably too gray, so let's get a little more red in this. Okay, that's looking brown. And it's looking kind of dark chocolatey brown. We don't want that, so that's too much. So let's go back into the red, grab some of that. That's the color I like. Now, what I'm watching is not where it's piled up. I'm watching where it's thin and white across the palette. And I don't want too much to change. Lighten it a little. Maybe a little more red. Yeah, a little more red. Grab some of that. Water. So, I can use the model or the picture to that looks good, to get our red. But, it's a stick. And I want to make it, I can make it look what I want it to look like. What makes sense to me. Okay, so, yeah, we'll get to that, little of that too, make sure it gets caught up. So we also, I'm moving a little off over here, because I want to drop in some darker brown. I want it to be similar to this. I don't want it to be a foreign color. So we're going to add some French ultramarine to that, some warm blue, and that makes kind of a flatter, darker brown. Okay, so, and also earlier today, my French ultramarine, it broke loose again from the palette, which happens. So I just got the bottom wet, and I used my thumb and I stuck it back on there. You can also, if you have a tube of paint handy, put a little French ultramarine underneath it and stick it back down. That sometimes holds it. And I think I've described this before. This happens, I think this happens because as that particular paint dries, I think it shrinks. So I'm getting this wetter. I put it in the paint, and I want to watch and see what happens. It really pushes the other paint back. Now that's more than a surge to me. That's I think there's something different in this chemical that makes it look like that. So this is kind of darkish, which is really what we're after. So I'm gonna keep that. It might be a little bluer than I want, so I'll grab a little more red. That will work right there. Okay, so let's get some water. Make sure this is mixed well. Make sure it is the brown we want. We want to actually put a very light wash on there. I think I want it a little redder. And what I don't know, well, I guess I can tell by looking at my camera. Yeah, those colors are pretty true. Okay, maybe I made it too red. All right. So I still want this to be a thinner wash. So I'll still go back, get some water up here at the end, and mix that. See just how thin that is. And it's better to start out thin or light, because if you make something dark, it's really hard to take it back, right? You can always make something too light darker. Okay, so let's switch back over to our painting. Okay, so I'm going to start at this end and work down with this wash. And like I described before, we are going to put some dark in to make it kind of shadowed in the bottom, 3D-ish. That's still a little dark. Can you see the masking fluid underneath? So I'm going to make this go right around the outside of that ring, just like that. And I'll pull it down. I do want to have more of a puddle here. In other words, more water, because I want this to stay wet as I pull it across. And because I want to go back and drop some of that darker color in. In fact, we should probably do that now. And I'm not going to rinse my brush. I'm going to get my number 6 brush. Oh, I should have mentioned, I recommend that you watch this through to the end, because now and as time goes on, I'm going to suggest that you go fast. Not because the paper is going to well up. This is supposed to be hot press and it's supposed to handle that. But what I'm concerned about is that where this ended down here, it might make a line and dry, and we want to keep this kind of going. I'm going to add just a little under that knot. Oh, not on top of it. There we go. So I'm going to set that brush down and get back into that thin red, and hopefully not let there be a line here. So I need to make my branch get narrower, but also make it smooth. Now see, well, I guess it turned out okay. So I'll push that down a little farther, right across his toes. I'm going to turn it to the other side, because I do want to have a nice line underneath his belly. And that's as far as this next is going to go, but I certainly need more water, more paint. The plan or the goal was to push this down. This needs to be wet still here. Not necessarily dark, but just wet. So we'll turn it back around so I can do this side. So I get the edge wet, which you can see. Okay, so that's all. I'll push a little back just to make sure it's... And since I'm interested in dropping that paint in the bottom, well, that's where I'll make sure this paint is. And I'll switch brushes, grab a little water, some of that dark paint, and now I've learned if I do it this way, what it does is it makes little thorns stick out of the side of my branch. So I'm not going to do that, but I've got to make these drops smaller, which means I touch the paper towel. Let's see if that helps. There we go. And we're not painting a line, and there's a reason for that. We actually want this spreading to be a little irregular. In other words, we don't want it to be one line. We want it to kind of drift up and in. So, I can do his toes. I think I'll do the rest of that later. Let's get back with our wash. So I can see an edge is starting to dry, and we want to avoid that. Can we continue this without a hard edge? Otherwise I have to come back and soften it. Since it's not very hard or dry now, I'll try to soften through that. That looks like it's going to work. So this side seems to be okay. Now this branch, I don't have to have an end. We just has to go, as far as I'm concerned, and just and just end. Spin it around. So I can go right over his toes and keep that line continuous. See, I'm tempted to go back, but I'm afraid that'll be darker. Go all the way to the end, and we can leave that end jagged or however we want to. And I'll flip it again. Can you see the end? Well, you can now. Or maybe not. There we are. So make sure this is still, get some thinner paint, drop in some water, paint across there. So it's wet, not puddled. So dry my brush, go back, pick up a little bit of this. And then switch brushes, get some of that darker. This time I'm going to make sure I touch my brush to the paper towel, drop some in. And hopefully that will, as it dries, spread out. Again, I can be a little irregular when I do this. And now we let that dry. While it dries, we can prepare our wash for the body of the bird and the head, and then maybe when we're done with that, the branch will be dry and we can add some more highlights or some more texture to it.